The day I got married, my parents were at a resort in Scottsdale, 3 states away, posting spa photos on Facebook while I walked myself down the aisle. My father had told me 6 months earlier that he would not watch me ruin my life in a white dress. My mother cried on cue and said she hoped I'd come to my senses before it was too late. I didn't come to my senses. I married Daniel Reyes on a Saturday in October, at a small vineyard outside Asheville, North Carolina, in front of 74 people who actually loved us, and 2 empty chairs in the front row that I'd asked the event coordinator to remove the night before. For 11 months after that, my parents maintained their silence. No calls. No photos requested. No birthday card. They told their friends at Hargrove Country Club that I had made a disappointing choice and that they were giving me space to figure it out. 11 months of nothing, and then my husband's phone lit up on a Tuesday evening while he was in the shower. The text was from my father. "Daniel. I need to speak with you privately. It's urgent. Please don't tell Reese yet." He had $214,000 in debt he couldn't cover, a second mortgage on the house my mother had bragged about for 15 years, and a medical practice 3 months from insolvency. The man who stood in front of his country club friends and said his daughter had married beneath herself was quietly texting her husband for a lifeline. He just didn't know that Daniel had already shown me the message. If you're already feeling this one, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing who's out there. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand that text, you have to understand what my family spent 3 years building, and what they never once thought to question. My name is Reese Callahan. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in a 4-bedroom colonial in Meadowbrook, Georgia, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are maintained by someone else's hands and the cars in the driveway are replaced every 3 years without discussion. My father, Dr. Warren Callahan, built a family medicine practice over 20 years from a single-room office on Piedmont Avenue into a 4-physician group with a 6-week wait for new patients. My mother, Patricia, ran the social life of the household like it was a full-time position: charity galas, country club committees, a rotating schedule of dinners and fundraisers that she tracked in a leather planner she carried everywhere. I was their only child. One daughter to carry the Callahan image. I understood the assignment early. Piano lessons by 7. Tennis at 10. AP courses, debate team, and a summer research fellowship at Emory the summer before senior year. These weren't things I did because I loved them. They were the currency my parents traded in. Every achievement wasn't mine. It was a talking point at the next club dinner. My daughter placed second at state. My daughter made the honors program. My accomplishments were listed like assets, and I was the portfolio. I graduated from the University of Georgia on a partial academic scholarship, covered the rest with grants and a student loan I paid off before I was 26. I took a job at a regional hospital system in Atlanta managing grant compliance for the foundation office. Not a flashy title. Not a name anyone at Hargrove would recognize. But I had built it without a cosigner, without my father's name on an application anywhere, and in those early years that distinction mattered to me more than I could put into words. My parents were moderately satisfied. Professional title. Downtown apartment. Respectable LinkedIn profile. I wasn't a physician or an attorney, which registered as the first quiet disappointment, but I was adjacent to medicine. Warren Callahan could say she's in healthcare administration, federal grant compliance with a certain measured weight, and the room would nod. Then I met Daniel. I met Daniel Reyes at a community blood drive I'd organized through the hospital foundation. He came in on his lunch break, still in his work clothes, dark pants and a navy polo with a logo stitched above the chest pocket. Reyes Plumbing and Mechanical Services. He sat down in the donor chair beside mine because it was the only open one, made a joke about the folding chairs that actually made me laugh, and we talked for 20 minutes while the nurses processed our paperwork. He had calluses on his hands and clean nails. He paid for both of our coffees at the diner across the street without making a moment of it. We dated for nearly 3 years before I brought him to Meadowbrook. I knew what was coming. I had told myself that if my parents could see what I saw, the steadiness in him, the way he talked about his work, the way he showed up, quietly and completely, every single time, they would get past the surface. I wanted to believe they were capable of that. I gave them every opportunity. They did not surprise me. My father shook Daniel's hand at the front door, scanned him in 3 seconds, the polo, the company truck parked in the driveway, and said, "So you're a plumber?" Not a question. Not a welcome. A classification. Daniel said yes. He owned a plumbing and HVAC company with 11 employees. My father said, "That's interesting," and turned toward the kitchen to ask my mother if dinner was ready. That was the welcome. 4 words and a turned back. Dinner was a controlled excavation. My mother asked where Daniel had gone to college. He hadn't. He'd completed a 2-year trade certification at Georgia Piedmont Technical College and gone to work for a mentor at 19. My mother smiled the smile she reserved for information she intended to file and use later. She asked how his family felt about his career path. She asked whether he'd ever considered going back for a degree. Then she asked, and I felt this one land in the room like a stone dropped in still water, whether he thought he'd still be doing this work at 50. Daniel answered every question without hesitation and without apology. He talked about the work the way people who actually build things do, not to impress anyone, just to describe what was real. He said the problem-solving was what he loved. He had 3 apprentices he was training, and that was the part of the business he was proudest of. He said a good plumber can keep a family in their home when everything else goes wrong, and he meant it literally, but in that dining room the sentence carried more than one meaning. My father said, "Good for you," and pivoted to tell us about the renovation Hargrove was planning for the East Terrace. On the drive home I didn't speak for 10 minutes. Daniel drove. The radio was off. He put his hand on mine somewhere on I-285 and held it. "You don't have to apologize for them," he said eventually. "I wasn't going to," I said. He squeezed my hand. "I know." What followed those 2 years was a quiet campaign. Not dramatic. Not loud. My parents applied the kind of pressure that works by accumulation, steady, patient, low-grade, the way a river reshapes stone over time without any single moment you can point to. My mother called every 2 weeks. The conversations always circled back. Was I still seeing Daniel? Had I thought seriously about where this was going? Did I know that Thomas Hale from her book club had a son who'd just made partner at a firm in Buckhead? She never said what she meant directly. She framed it as concern. "I just want you to be taken care of, sweetheart. I just want your life to be what it should be." My father was more direct. He pulled me aside at Easter when I was 29 and said, "Reese, you are a smart woman with real potential. Don't anchor yourself to something that won't keep up with you." I told him Daniel's company had grossed $1.3 million the previous year. He went still for a moment. Then he said, "That's not the point." And we both knew he was right that it wasn't the point. The point was the polo shirt. The trade certification instead of a diploma. The fact that Daniel couldn't be introduced at the club as anything requiring a graduate degree. The money didn't move my father because money was never the actual objection. Status was the objection. And status, as Warren Callahan defined it, was not something you earned with a plumbing company, no matter how well you ran it. When Daniel proposed in February of the following year, a Tuesday night at home, no restaurant, no performance, just the 2 of us at our kitchen table and a ring he'd had made by a jeweler he'd known since high school, I said yes before he finished asking. I called my parents the next morning. My mother's first response was 3 full seconds of silence. From Patricia Callahan, that communicated entire paragraphs. Then she said, "Well, Reese." Just my name, with weight beneath it. My father picked up the extension and said he needed time to think about what this meant for the family. I told him he had until Sunday. Sunday came. My parents called together, which they only did for announcements. My father spoke first. He said they had discussed it thoroughly, that they had prayed about it, Warren Callahan invoked prayer specifically when he wanted to close a conversation, and that they could not in good conscience attend a wedding they did not support. He said they loved me. He said he hoped I would reconsider. My mother added that they weren't trying to be cruel. They were trying to protect me. I told them I appreciated their honesty, and that the wedding was scheduled for October 14th at the Clover Ridge Vineyard outside Asheville, North Carolina. I gave them the venue name. I gave them the time. If you change your mind, I said, the door is open. But I'm not holding the date. My father said I was making a mistake I would regret. My mother cried. I said goodbye and set the phone on the counter. Daniel was at the table with his coffee, watching me. He knew how it had gone. I'm okay, I said, and that was true in the way complicated things are sometimes true. Partially. Held together by will more than feeling. You want to delay it? Give them more time? No. I straightened a stack of mail that didn't need straightening. I'd been giving them time for 3 years. What my parents hadn't planned for was this: there is no clean story you can tell about not coming to your daughter's wedding. There is no version of that absence that doesn't reflect back on you. In Meadowbrook, Georgia, where everyone knew everyone and social reputation was the only currency that actually mattered to the Callahans, there was no way to explain it that didn't land somewhere ugly. My mother tried. She told people privately that I had rushed into things, that there were concerns she couldn't get into. She was not absent, she was worried. She had reservations. She was hoping for the best. Some people believed her. My cousin Lee, who had been close to my mother her whole adult life, called me 2 weeks before the wedding. She said, Aunt Patricia is telling people your fiancé has some issues she can't get into. She wasn't calling to warn me. She was calling, I think, because she'd reached her own limit with the performance and needed to say it out loud to someone who would understand. I thanked her. I didn't call my mother. I filed it in the same place I had filed everything from the past 3 years, documented, not forgotten. The wedding happened. October 14th, a clear sky, the vineyard rose gold and amber in the October light, the Blue Ridge faint in the distance. My Uncle David, my father's younger brother, the only one in that family who called things what they were, walked me down the small white cloth aisle between the vines. My best friend Cara stood beside me. Daniel's sister stood beside him. The officiant was a woman who had known us from the farmer's market where we spent Sunday mornings. No 8-piece band. No receiving line. No formal dinner at a country club venue chosen for the photos. Just us. Just 74 people who wanted to be there. Daniel cried when I reached him. Not much. Just enough, one hand at his jaw for a half-second, the way men cry when they're trying not to and lose the argument with themselves. He took both my hands. I didn't cry until the vows. And then I couldn't stop. 74 people cheered in a vineyard in the mountains. My parents were 400 miles away getting a couple's massage at a Scottsdale resort. That was October 14th. After the wedding, the silence from my parents was immediate and total. No card. No call. No gift. Not even a message routed through a relative. Patricia Callahan, who sent handwritten notes for every minor occasion, distant cousins' graduations, neighbors' promotions, the new baby of someone she'd met once at a charity luncheon, had nothing to say to her only daughter in the days after her daughter's wedding. I waited 2 weeks. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the 4th ring. Her voice was careful, the social voice she used for situations she hadn't fully prepared for. I told her the wedding had been beautiful. I told her we were home, that we were happy, that the vineyard had been everything we'd hoped. I kept my voice level and matter of fact. She said, "That's good, Reese. I hope it was what you wanted." I told her it was exactly what I wanted. She said she hoped things would settle down and that we could find a way to move forward as a family. I asked her what moving forward meant to her. She went quiet. Then she said, "It means we love you, and we hope you'll understand why we made the choice we made." I told her understanding and agreeing weren't the same thing. And that I would always be their daughter, but I was not going to carry the weight of their choice and call it love on their behalf. She started to cry. I said goodbye. That was November. After that, the silence continued, but it changed texture. It shifted from the silence of a protest, pointed and deliberate, to the silence of people who had painted themselves into a corner and couldn't figure out how to step off the floor without acknowledging the painting. My father called once in March, a brief and oddly careful conversation. He asked how I was doing. He asked about work. He asked how Daniel was doing, and I marked that, because he had not said Daniel's name in my presence in 3 years. He'd said he, or your situation, or, at his most direct, that man. Hearing the name come out of his mouth felt like something shifting, however slightly. I told him Daniel was well. That the business was doing well. They'd just landed a commercial contract in Kennesaw, a multi-unit development, the biggest single project they'd taken on. My father said, "That's good to hear." Then he said he'd let me get back to it, and ended the call. I told Daniel that night. He listened, then said, "He's circling. Looking for the door." When someone's too proud to apologize, Daniel said, they start locating exits first. Give him time. What I didn't know was that my father wasn't just circling the door to an apology. He was circling the door to something else entirely. And whatever had kept him circling those 11 months, it was less about pride than it was about a problem that had been building quietly behind the Meadowbrook Colonial's clean facade, a problem that had a dollar figure attached to it, a specific one, and a deadline he couldn't manage alone. I found that out on a Tuesday evening in September. Daniel was in the shower. His phone was on the kitchen counter, face up. It lit up with my father's name, and I read the preview before I could choose not to. Daniel. I need to speak with you privately. It's urgent. Please don't tell Reese yet. I set down my glass. The shower was still running in the other room. I stood there reading it a second time, then a third. Please don't tell Reese yet. My father. Who had not come to my wedding. Who had told his country club friends his daughter made a disappointing choice. Who had spent 11 months in deliberate silence while I built a life that, by every honest measure, was good and steady and mine. That man was now on my husband's phone asking for a private conversation and asking for a secret. I didn't touch the phone. I waited until Daniel came out of the shower, found me standing in the kitchen, and read my face. He looked at his phone. Then back at me. I told him about the preview. He picked it up, read the full message, and handed it to me without a word. Daniel. I need to speak with you privately. It's urgent. Please don't tell Reese yet. I need some financial guidance. It's about the practice. I'm in a difficult position and I can't discuss this with family right now. Please call me when you can. I read it twice. Daniel watched me. Do you want me to respond? He asked. I handed the phone back to him. Not yet. Tell me something first. I looked at him. How long has he been contacting you? The pause before his answer was less than a second. This is the third message, he said. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and it helps me keep bringing you stories like this one. Because what comes next, what those 3 messages said, what my father had been hiding, and what Daniel and I decided to do about it, that's where this story stops being about a wedding. That's where it becomes something else completely. Daniel showed me all 3 messages that same night. The first had come 7 weeks earlier, in late July. It was framed casually, Warren asking if Daniel might have time for coffee sometime, saying he'd been doing a lot of thinking and thought it might be good to connect. Friendly. Innocuous on its surface. The kind of message you could file as a tentative olive branch if you weren't paying attention to the timing. Daniel had been paying attention. The message came 2 days after a short piece ran in the Meadowbrook Gazette's business section about a local medical practice group facing restructuring challenges following market shifts in insurance reimbursements. The article didn't name the practice. It didn't need to. Anyone in the Meadowbrook professional community would have connected the dots within 48 hours. Warren Callahan's practice had expanded aggressively 2 years prior, taking on a second location and committing to a $340,000 renovation of the main office. The associate physician they'd hired to staff the second location had left after 14 months, taking his patient panel with him. Reimbursement rates from 2 of their major insurers had been cut by 11% and 14% respectively. The math, Daniel said quietly, wasn't complicated once you had the pieces. He hadn't responded. He'd screenshot the message and put his phone face down. The second message came in mid-August. Warren dropped the casual framing entirely. He mentioned some cash flow challenges at the practice and asked whether Daniel happened to know any private investors or business lenders in the Atlanta market, people who understood medical practices and could offer flexible financing. Said he wasn't looking for anything formal, just a conversation with someone experienced. Daniel hadn't responded to that one either. The third message, "I need to speak with you privately. It's urgent. Please don't tell Reese yet," was the one I'd seen light up the counter. I stood in our kitchen and read all 3 in order. Then I set the phone down between us. "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked. I looked at the kitchen window. The tree line. The yard we'd planted in spring. I thought about the Hargrove Country Club, the pressed tablecloths, the practiced conversations. My father's voice saying that's not the point. My mother's smile, the one she used when she was filing information for later. The Facebook photos from Scottsdale, timestamped 40 minutes before I said my vows. "Nothing yet," I said. "Let him make his move. Let him choose the room." Daniel nodded slowly. "But when he makes it," I said, "I want to be in it." He picked up his phone and looked at me. "You were always going to be in it," he said. Warren called Daniel 4 days later. Not me. Daniel. He proposed dinner at the house in Meadowbrook, framed as a chance to reconnect, an acknowledgement that things had gone too far, an olive branch from a father who had been doing a lot of thinking. He said Patricia was eager to see me. He said they both missed us. He said it was time to put the past year behind them. Daniel said yes. Saturday the 12th. We'd be there at 6. He called me the moment Warren hung up. I listened to the summary with my eyes on the backyard. Did he mention the money? Not yet. Daniel's voice was even. He'll wait until he can get me alone. After dinner, most likely. Step outside. Keep it off the record. I thought about that. Traced the plan as my father had built it. He couldn't ask me directly, that required admitting the financial crisis to his daughter, who he had spent 11 months ignoring. He couldn't go to Patricia, she clearly didn't know the full picture. So he had approached Daniel. Man to man. Privately. He would handle Daniel, Daniel would handle me, and by the time I found out, the deal would already be structured and my father would have quietly reclaimed the narrative. It was not a bad plan. It was the kind of plan that works on people who don't know you're running it. Daniel and I talked about everything. We had read every message together. My father didn't know any of that. I called my mother 2 days before the dinner. Kept it warm, brief, said I was looking forward to Saturday. She sounded genuinely relieved, or at least she sounded the way Patricia Callahan sounded when she was relieved, which involved a carefully managed undercurrent of graciousness. Then she mentioned she had invited her friend Carol Marsh to join us. She's been asking about you for months, sweetheart. I thought it would be nice, more of a celebration than just a family dinner. Carol Marsh. I knew Carol well enough without knowing her. She was my mother's closest friend at Hargrove. Wednesday lunches, standing reservation, the leather booth in the back corner. She was the woman my mother had leaned toward across those lunches for 11 months and confided in. The woman who had heard, from my mother's own mouth, that Reese had made a disappointing choice. That there were concerns. That her fiancé had issues Patricia couldn't get into. Carol would be sitting at the table. I said that sounded lovely. Said I was really looking forward to seeing her. I hung up and went to find Daniel in the workshop. He was sanding a custom shelving unit, the kind of clean, patient work he did in the hours after a long job day. He looked up when I came in. "Carol Marsh is coming," I said. He set down the sander. "Your mom's country club friend?" "The same one who heard I'd married down." He was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something quieter than that, the expression he wore when something was exactly what it needed to be. "Okay," he said, and picked up the sander again. We drove to Meadowbrook on a Saturday evening in October, 1 year and 2 days after our wedding. The neighborhood was the same, maintained lawns, seasonal wreaths, the particular stillness of a street where everyone works very hard to make effort invisible. My parents' driveway held a smaller sedan I didn't recognize. The Audi my mother had driven for 6 years was gone. I noted it without commenting. Patricia met us at the door in a navy dress, more carefully put together than a casual family dinner required. She hugged me with warmth that was real, held a little too long, the hug of a woman reaching past 11 months of absence and hoping the distance wasn't as permanent as it felt. She hugged Daniel with warmth that was practiced. I saw the difference. I said nothing. Carol was already in the living room with a glass of white wine, poised and put together in the way women at Hargrove always were. She stood when we walked in. Her eyes moved over Daniel with a quick, involuntary assessment that she rearranged into pleasantness almost fast enough. "This must be Daniel," she said. "It must," he said, and shook her hand with the easy confidence of someone who had never required approval from any room he walked into. Carol blinked, recalibrated slightly, smiled. My father came in from the study. The handshake he gave Daniel was firmer than it needed to be, the grip of a man trying to communicate control through his palm. "Good to see you both." His eyes moved to me for a half-second with something in them I hadn't seen before. Not warmth. Not anger. Need. The specific, vulnerable need of a man who has been managing a crisis in private and is running out of time. I smiled back at him. Dinner was as beautiful as my mother made everything. The good china. Candles. A centerpiece from the florist on Pine Street, white dahlias in a low crystal vase. Patricia had cooked herself, which she rarely did for anything with guests, which told me she wanted the evening to feel intimate. Controlled. She wanted the right tone before anyone said anything real. The conversation moved through safe territory. Carol's son's promotion at his firm. The renovation at Hargrove's East Wing. A trip my parents had taken to Savannah in the spring. My father drank more than I'd seen him drink at a family dinner in years, not visibly, not dramatically, but glass refilled a half-count sooner than normal if you were watching. I was watching. Carol asked Daniel about his work with the careful, measured curiosity that masks an underlying ranking system, the kind of curiosity that wants to place something before it commits to respecting it. Daniel talked about the Kennesaw Development Project. 62-unit residential complex, full mechanical systems installation. Largest single contract his company had taken on, his 3rd year of consecutive annual revenue growth. The second phase starting in spring. 62 units, Carol repeated. Phase 1, Daniel said. Something shifted in the room. Numbers do that. They rearrange conversations even when people wish they wouldn't. My mother smiled across the dahlias at me, and I recognized in that smile the involuntary recalibration of a woman beginning to understand she had been working with incomplete information for a long time. The meal ended. My father pushed back his chair and looked at Daniel. "Why don't we take brandy in the study?" His voice was smooth, measured. The physician's voice. The Hargrove Committee voice. The voice that had been managing rooms since before I was born. Daniel set his napkin on the table. Actually, Warren, I was hoping we could all sit together a little longer. Calm. Pleasant. The way Daniel said everything when something important was happening. I think Reese has something she wanted to say. My father's jaw tightened by a single fraction. In his version of this evening, I was not supposed to have anything to say. I was supposed to be at this end of the table while the men handled the real matter in the study. He looked at me. I set my phone face up on the table between the candles and the crystal vase. Dad, I said. I've read all 3 messages. The room went still. Carol's wine glass paused halfway to her mouth. My mother's eyes moved from my face to my father's. Warren Callahan had been managing rooms his entire professional life, difficult diagnoses, staff conflicts, committee disputes, 30 years of Meadowbrook social politics. His face was very practiced at neutral. In the 10 seconds that followed my sentence, I watched neutral fail him for the first time I could remember. What messages? My mother's voice was careful. Even. The voice of a woman choosing her footing before stepping forward. The ones Dad sent Daniel in July, August, and September, I said. Asking for financial help with the practice. Asking Daniel not to tell me. My mother turned to my father. Not with anger, not with panic, with the particular expression of a woman who has run a household for 30 years on the assumption that certain information would always be shared with her, and who has just understood it wasn't. Warren. My father's hand was flat on the table. He was looking at his brandy glass. This isn't the right moment to, he asked Daniel for $214,000, I said. Still level. Still quiet. To cover practice operating debt. There's also a second mortgage on this house that may be larger than you know. Carol set her wine glass down on the tablecloth. My mother's face did not collapse. Patricia Callahan's face never collapsed, it restructured, reclassified, rearranged. But the color left it in a way that no amount of rearranging could address. Warren, she said again. And this time that single word held a question, a statement, and something that sounded like an ending, all at once. My father looked at me. His voice, when it came, was lower than I had ever heard it, stripped of everything. The country club polish gone. The physician's calm authority gone. Just a man at his own dinner table with nowhere left to manage the room to. You had no right to read those messages. Daniel showed them to me. I held his gaze. He shows me everything. My father looked at Daniel then. And I watched something move across his face. It looked like betrayal, but it wasn't betrayal. You can't betray someone you were running a scheme against. What it actually was, I think, was the specific pain of a plan built on an assumption that Daniel would keep his confidence, that the plumber's loyalty could be counted on, and the discovery that the assumption was wrong from the start. He's my husband, I said. Did you really think you would keep a secret from me? A secret that involved $214,000 and my father? My father had no answer. I looked at him across my mother's good china and her dahlias and her candles, and I said the sentence I had been sitting with for 3 weeks. I said it quietly, the way you say the truest things. You needed him. You just didn't want to admit it. 10 words. Carol Marsh looked at the tablecloth. My mother pressed both hands flat against the table. My father, who had built a practice from nothing, who had chaired the Hargrove Finance Committee for 6 years, who had not once in my memory admitted to needing anything from anyone, looked at his glass and said nothing at all. Daniel did not speak. He had said everything he needed to say by being exactly who he was, the man my father had spent 3 years dismissing, sitting at his table, having never once texted him back. I stood. Smoothed my jacket. Picked up my phone. I love you, Mom. I looked at her, and I meant it, all the complicated weight of it. When you're ready to talk, really talk, I'm here. I looked at my father. Same offer stands for you. We walked out through the kitchen, through the back hallway, out the door I had used my entire childhood. The night air was cool. The neighborhood was quiet. The company truck sat at the curb exactly where we'd left it. Daniel drove. I sat with my hands in my lap, completely steady now, the particular steadiness that comes after something has been said that cannot be unsaid. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." He nodded, eyes forward. I watched the Meadowbrook streetlights pass and thought about the first time I'd driven this street at 17, heading out to a friend's house, and my father had reminded me from the doorway to be home by 10, not because he was worried, but because the neighbors watched. I thought about how many decisions in that house had been made by what the neighbors watched. The neighbors had watched tonight. One of them had been at the table. "How much of it did you mean?" I asked. "The offer. When they're ready to talk." Daniel was quiet for a beat. "All of it," he said. "I always meant all of it." The fallout moved faster than I had expected. My mother texted at 9:47 p.m. while we were still 40 minutes from home. "Can we talk tomorrow? Just us. Not about the money. About everything." I replied, "Yes. Call me at 10. My father did not text. My father did not call. What he did, I found out later through my cousin Lee, was drive to the Hargrove parking lot and sit in his car for nearly 2 hours. Lee's husband worked the late shift at the neighboring hotel and recognized the car. A dark sedan, parked alone at the far end of the lot. Engine off. No movement. Lee told me without commentary. She didn't need to add any. Carol Marsh, to her credit, called my mother first thing Sunday morning. I don't know the full content of that conversation. My mother shared pieces of it later, the way people share things in pieces when the whole picture is still too large to hold at once. What Carol apparently said came down to this: "Patricia, I think you may have gotten some things wrong about that young man." For Hargrove Country Club, that was practically a formal statement. Carol Marsh did not hand those out casually. By Monday, 2 things had become clear. The first was the actual state of my father's finances. My mother sat down with the practice accountant, a meeting she told me, with a particular flatness in her voice, she had not been included in before. She learned the full picture. The $340,000 renovation loan, taken 3 years prior at a rate that had adjusted upward twice. The second mortgage, $163,000, taken 18 months ago when the practice reserve account ran low. The operating account, which had held a 6-month payroll buffer 2 years before, now held 11 days. The $214,000 my father had cited to Daniel was not the total. It was the immediate need. The full restructuring would require either a practice buyer or a significant outside investor. My mother called me after that meeting. She didn't cry. Her voice was the voice of a woman who had just understood, clearly and completely, the terms she had been living under without knowing it. "He didn't tell me," she said. "I know. He told me things were tight. He said it was manageable." "I know, Mom." A pause. Then, quieter, "How long have you known?" 7 weeks. Another pause, longer, waited with the math of it. Her daughter had known for 7 weeks. Her daughter's husband had known before that. The man Patricia had spent 3 years managing impressions about had been quietly holding information that her own husband had hidden from her, and he had given it to Reese without hesitation, without negotiation, without being asked twice. "He went to Daniel first," she said. "Yes. Because he thought Daniel would keep it from you." "Yes." She exhaled slowly. The sound of something finally being set down after a long time of carrying it. "That was a mistake," she said. "That was the mistake," I said. Most of the others were some version of that same one. The second thing that became clear that week I hadn't anticipated. Daniel's company was shortlisted for a second commercial contract, not through any connection to my family, not through anything I had arranged, but through a referral from the developer behind the Kennesaw project, who had passed Daniel's name to a second firm working in the same market. The referral email arrived on the Monday after our Saturday in Meadowbrook. Daniel told me at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee in hand. His voice was the same voice he used to tell me anything: the water heater needs replacing, the client wants changes to the shelving unit, the second contract just came through. $2.1 million. Full mechanical systems. 18-month build timeline. I sat across from him for a moment. Thought about my father's voice, patient and certain and completely wrong. Don't anchor yourself to something that won't keep up with you. He keeps up just fine, I said. Daniel looked up from the laptop. The corner of his mouth moved. We keep up just fine, he said. My mother called at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, exactly when I told her to. No preamble. No practiced opening. She just said, I owe you an apology, and I want to start there before I say anything else. That was new. Patricia Callahan did not lead with apologies. She led with context, with framing, with the architecture of a conversation built to arrive at a conclusion she'd already chosen. An apology at the front of a sentence, unqualified, with nothing attached to it, that was new territory. I let her talk. She talked for a long time. She talked about the 11 months. She said she had known it was wrong to stay silent as long as they did, but that she had been so locked into my father's version of events, his certainty, his framing, his ability to make the reasonable position sound like the only position, that she hadn't found the footing to push back. She said she had told herself she was being a united front. She said she understood now that a united front and a wrong front were not the same thing. She talked about Carol. She said the call Sunday morning had been uncomfortable in the specific way that conversations with old friends become uncomfortable when the friend has to say something true. Carol had told her, gently and directly, that she had found Daniel impressive. That the picture Patricia had drawn of him over the past 3 years did not match the man at the table. That Patricia might want to examine which version of the story she had been telling. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, I hear you, Mom. And I want to keep talking. But I need you to know that moving forward doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means something different. Something more honest. She said she understood. I believed her, provisionally, the way you believe someone who has just understood something difficult and hasn't yet had the chance to prove it. We talked every week after that. The conversations were shorter at first, careful, finding their footing. Then longer. Then occasionally easy. Not the ease of pretending nothing happened. The ease of two people who have agreed to be honest with each other and are discovering what that costs and what it gives back. My father was slower. He called 6 weeks after the dinner, on a Thursday evening. I almost didn't recognize his voice when I answered, it was so stripped of its usual architecture. No physician's calm, no committee chairman's gravity. Just a man on the other end of the line who didn't know how to start. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly, without framing it as a misunderstanding or attributing it to stress or adding the word but anywhere in the sentence. He said he had been wrong about Daniel. He said he had been wrong about the way he had handled things, and that there was no version of it he could explain that made it acceptable. I told him I appreciated that. He asked, very quietly, if there was any path forward. I thought about what Daniel had said in the car driving home. I always meant all of it. I thought about the fact that my husband, the man my father had spent 3 years dismissing and then secretly contacted for a 6-figure bailout, had never once said anything bitter about Warren Callahan in my presence. Not in private. Not to me, not to his sister, not to anyone. He had shown me the messages because that was what honesty looked like between us. But he had not used them as ammunition. He had simply waited. There's a path, I told my father. But it starts with you and Daniel. Not through me. A pause. He'd be willing to talk to me? Call him, I said. He'll answer. That phone call between my father and Daniel lasted 34 minutes. I know because Daniel told me afterward, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. He didn't give me a transcript. He just said, he apologized. I think he meant it. We're going to get coffee next week. I looked at him for a moment. You don't have to do that. I know, he said. That's why I'm doing it. That is the thing about Daniel Reyes that no amount of polo evaluation or degree checking or country club categorizing could have located. He did not operate out of score settling. He operated out of steadiness. The kind of steadiness you build when you learn early that the work itself is the point, that what you leave behind when you go matters more than what people thought of you while you were there. My father, I think, understood something at that coffee that he had not been able to understand for 3 years. That Daniel had not been competing with him. That there had never been a competition. That what he had experienced as a threat was simply a person, whole and self-sufficient, who did not require Warren Callahan's approval to know his own worth. It is a humbling thing to discover that the person you dismissed was never looking at you at all. The practice sold in February. Not the outcome my father had wanted. He had built that office over 20 years, and walking away from it at 61 was not a choice he would have made under any other circumstances. But the buyer was a regional health system that kept all 4 physicians on staff, absorbed the existing patient panels, and settled the outstanding debt in full at closing. The second mortgage on the Meadowbrook house was paid off. The $214,000 crisis that had driven my father to his son-in-law's text messages was resolved without a single dollar from our household. My father did not thank Daniel for the referral. The contact Daniel had quietly passed along through his commercial construction network, a healthcare business attorney who specialized in small practice acquisitions. He didn't thank him directly. What he did was show up, unannounced, at our house in Decatur on a Saturday morning in March with 2 coffees from the diner on Route 9 and a handshake that lasted longer than it needed to. Daniel let him in. They sat on the porch for an hour. I watched from the kitchen window, not listening, just watching. 2 men on a porch in the March light, one of them learning, at 61, what it meant to sit still with someone he'd underestimated. The other one just drinking his coffee. My mother, in those same months, began doing something I hadn't expected. She started filling out job applications. Not dramatic ones. Not a reinvention. A part-time position at the Meadowbrook Community Library, 3 mornings a week, assisting with programming for their early literacy initiative. She had a teaching credential she'd never surrendered, let it lapse administratively, but the foundation was still there. She got the position in April. She told me on the phone the afternoon the letter arrived, and her voice carried something I don't think I had ever heard in it before. Not the satisfaction of a charity gala well executed, not the smooth pride of a social obligation met. Something quieter than that. Something that belonged to her. I haven't worked in 31 years, she said. How does it feel? I asked. She thought about it for a moment. Like something that was always mine that I forgot to come back for. I did not say what I was thinking, that she hadn't forgotten, that the path back had simply been longer and more complicated than it should have been. I just said I was proud of her, and I meant it the way you mean things when they've been earned. Carol Marsh, to the surprise of absolutely no one who understood how Hargrove Country Club actually functioned, became an unlikely corrective force. Not through any announcement or confrontation. Through the quiet, consistent reappraisal of a woman who had updated her information and adjusted accordingly. She told people Daniel was impressive. She mentioned the Kennesaw Project. She spoke about our house in Decatur the way people speak about places they have been told about by someone they trust. The story at Hargrove changed. Not because I asked it to. Not because I corrected anyone. Because Carol Marsh had been at that dinner table and had updated her information and was not the kind of woman who held on to a wrong version out of loyalty to it. Social reputation in a neighborhood like Meadowbrook is a slow thing to rebuild and a faster thing to lose. My parents were rebuilding slowly. That was fair. It was the right pace for what had happened. I did not attend Hargrove. I did not seek an audience with anyone from my mother's social world or my father's. I did not need the validation, and I had learned, later than I should have, but I had learned, that seeking it had never been the answer. The people whose opinion actually mattered to me already knew who I was. The $2.1 million project broke ground in April. Daniel was on site at 5:30 most mornings, back by 7, out again by 8, the kind of schedule that looks punishing from the outside and from the inside just looks like the work. I drove by the site once, a Thursday afternoon, not to check on anything, just because I was curious. I parked on the street and looked at the structure going up, steel frame, the first floor already enclosed, the mechanical chase running up the east wall exactly where Daniel had drawn it in the plans 6 months before. A man in a hard hat I didn't recognize was consulting a set of drawings near the entrance. He looked up, saw me watching, and called across the site. "You looking for someone?" "No," I said. "I'm just looking." He nodded and went back to his drawings. I sat in the car for a few minutes. Thought about the navy polo with the logo stitched above the chest pocket. The folding chairs at the blood drive. The coffee across the street that he paid for without mentioning it. I thought about my father saying don't anchor yourself to something that won't keep up with you, and I thought about how thoroughly and quietly and without any effort at performance that assessment had been proven wrong. Then I started the car and drove home. There is something no one tells you about the end of a long injustice. You expect to feel triumphant. You expect the moment when things finally resolve to arrive with some kind of fanfare, a clear boundary crossed, a bell rung, a moment you can point to and say, there, that is where it changed. It does not work that way. What actually happens is slower and stranger and, if you let it, more meaningful. Things just begin to be different, and you notice the difference only when you look back at where you were and realize you are somewhere else now. I am somewhere else now. My parents are not the same people who drove to Scottsdale and posted spa photos while I walked myself down a vineyard aisle. They are not yet the people I would have wished them into being if I'd been given the choice. They are somewhere in between, honest more often than they were, capable of being wrong in front of me in a way they never were before, still learning what it costs to have maintained something false for as long as they did. That is enough. For now, it is enough. What I lost in the year between the wedding and that dinner table, I will not pretend I didn't lose it. 11 months is a long time. 11 months of your mother not asking to see your home, of your father's name not appearing on your phone, of watching your in-laws welcome you into their kitchen on Sundays while your own parents posted curated photos in a state 400 miles away, that leaves a mark. Not a wound exactly. More like a waterline. Evidence of where the water got to, even after it recedes. I am honest about that. The mark is there. I carry it without pretending otherwise. What I gained, I did not foresee. I gained a marriage that has been tested in the specific, clarifying way that matters, not by hardship from the outside, but by the question of who we each were when the pressure was real. Daniel showed me every message. He showed me immediately, without strategy, without deliberation. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. I gained a version of my mother I had never met before, one who shows up 3 mornings a week at a public library and reads picture books to 4-year-olds and comes home with glitter on her cardigan and something in her voice that sounds like ownership. I gained the knowledge that my father is capable of a real apology, that the man who said that's not the point about $1.3 million in annual revenue sat across from my husband at a diner on Route 9 and said I was wrong about you and meant both words equally. I did not gain a family that has fully reckoned with what it did. That is a longer process, and it is theirs to do, not mine to manage. What I know, sitting in the house in Decatur on an ordinary Tuesday evening with the back windows open and the sound of the tree lean in the dark and the light on over the kitchen table, what I know is this: my father called my husband a plumber as though the word was a verdict. He meant it to close a door. What it actually did was show me exactly which door needed closing, and which one had been open all along, the one I'd been walking through every day for 3 years without recognizing it for what it was. You do not have to set fire to anything to walk away from it. You do not have to scream or make a scene or wait for a dramatic moment where the injustice announces itself. Sometimes the most complete thing you can do is simply stand still and let the truth arrive at its own pace, and trust that when it does, you will still be standing. Daniel is in the workshop. I can hear the sander through the open door. He's building something for a client, a dining table, white oak, hand-finished. He'll be at it for another hour. I have a mug of tea going cold on the counter and a window full of dark and a life that looks nothing like the one my parents designed for me and everything like the one I would have chosen if anyone had ever asked. No one asked. So I chose it anyway. That is the whole story. That has always been the whole story. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the person someone underestimated, the one who was dismissed until it became inconvenient to keep dismissing you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the dinner table? The texts? Daniel drinking his coffee on the porch? I want to hear it. And if you're ready for another story, check out the videos on your screen right now. I think you'll feel exactly the same way about them. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you never miss what comes next. I'll see you in the next story.